Morning and welcome to Hawley Baptist Church and our live stream service. The group that you can see in front of us is Connected, our young people's group. So in fact we've got 3 people this morning who've never done this before, so I hope you'll be kind to all of us and just know that we're here and we really want to do this. They've always enjoyed doing it in the past. So it will be great if you can just stay with us and support us this morning. We have had really bad technical issues this morning. It was only a few minutes before the service that most things were reconnected. So there is a possibility that sometime we might not get the sermon, but at the moment it's all systems go, which is great. Okay, so we're looking forward this morning to the next in our Frontline series where Martin has been speaking about culture and moulding the culture around us. So our question this morning is going to be, how can our young people mould the culture around them? So I wondered if first of all we'd perhaps better decide what we mean by culture. So have any of you got any ideas about what it means when we're talking about moulding the culture?
Is it the way that if we're changing something from bad to good, maybe?
Yeah, so the culture in, say, your How many of you are into social media yet, or are you all a bit too young? You're kind of into social media, are you? So there's a whole culture, isn't there, that exists around social media, and social media can be a great way of engaging with people. We certainly use media from this church to try and explain the culture that we're trying to put across to the world. So how about when it comes to, I think we've got somebody else arriving. Maybe not.
Yeah, they can come on.
Who's this?
She's going to wait till the break.
Oh, whoever it is out there can come in there.
She said she'll wait till the break.
All right, okay. So the mystery person outside, I'm not sure who it is either. Right, so as we were saying, moulding culture. So what can you do to change the culture around you? If maybe some of your friends are being a bit nasty to each other, what can you do to change things? Ellie?
I would not interfere, but if it was being nasty to me, I would be kind to them to try and stop it.
That's a fab idea, isn't it? And that happens to grown-ups as well, doesn't it? Grown-ups fall sometimes, and it's much better if people are not being very nice, if we don't start being unpleasant as well. Much better if we can be kind and nice to them. What about in your football team now, when it's all going wrong? How do you change things there? Do you get cross with each other, or?
No, just to give positive energy, and that like is 0-0 in the game, just to keep them going.
And that changes things. So you're quite into drama, aren't you? What happens when it all goes a bit wrong there?
If like the director doesn't like it and he starts getting a bit moody or she, normally it's just we just take a minute break, so it doesn't all just so it doesn't feel like it's too much pressure on the actor.
That's good, just to take a little break, isn't it? I
Yeah.
think that's a good way of dealing with things. Okay then, so I think there's still a sermon intro video that we're going to have, which speaks more about what's happening this morning.
Hearts soften, wounds heal, people set free. Home, school, work, a nation changed. Day by day.
Okay, so one of the things I think that really can help us as we try to change the culture around us is by praying about things. And this is the group that meets on a Sunday morning. We have a group of slightly older young people who come together on a Thursday, and we're very keen on praying together. So on this Thursday, we put together some prayer videos. We've been looking at the 24/7 youth prayer course, and one particular session was on asking God for things. And one of the suggestions was to do an experiment. So you're going to see a video of the experiment we tried. So they dropped vitamin C tablets into water. You'll see why in a minute. And then two of the girls said a prayer, and two of the boys then did the Lord's Prayer for us. So if you would just join us then in our prayer videos.
Go. Go.
God, I give to you all my worries, fears, hopes, dreams, needs and wants. I cast my cares on you, for you care for me.
Thank you, Jesus, that you are above it all, and yet in it all. You are bigger than my needs, and yet you provide for my everyday needs.
Thank you that nothing is too hard for you, and yet nothing is too small for you.
I give my needs over to you, and now commit them into your care.
In Jesus' name, amen.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread.
And forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Okay, so I don't think we've had any responses to ideas, suggestions for our young people and changing culture.
There was one from Ian Jones.
Oh, there was, right.
In culture is.
Oh, well. Ellie, can you read what it says about what Ian Jones has said about culture?
Know who you are and who you are created to be, and then living as an example to your friends.
That's great, isn't it? I think that's a really, really good definition. Thank you very much, Ian. So if anybody else has got any other ideas, perhaps they could drop those into the box. In the sermon, which hopefully will be happening later, there are two readings. So two of the boys here this morning are going to read those to us. So if you could read Romans chapter 12 and verse 2.
Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed to the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and improve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will.
Thank you. And Martin will be preaching from Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 to 16.
You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how could it be saltiness again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven.
I think that very much fits in, doesn't it, with what we were saying about how we can live in a way that pleases God, and so help the people around us to see there is perhaps a different way of doing things. So 2 weeks ago, I think it was, we recorded a song, and then Martin joined and helped us out with a little bit of it as well. So if you'd like to enjoy the song that we put together, Over All the Earth.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Sunset sky, but my one request, Lord, my only aim, is that you'd reign in me again. Lord, reign in me, reign in your power, over all my dreams. In my darkest hour, you are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? Thought, over every word, may my life reflect the beauty of my Lord, which could be more to me than any earthly thing. So won't you reign in me again, Lord, reign in me, reign in your power, over all my dreams. In my darkest hour, you are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? Lord, reign in me, reign in your power, over all my dreams. In my darkest hour, you are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again?
I hope you enjoyed that song as much as we enjoyed putting it all together. And now we can go and join them for the sermon downstairs.
The live stream, we're 2 minutes earlier than planned, but never mind. So we are continuing, as I said earlier, our series on fruitfulness on the front line. Just so you know, this comes from an organisation called LICC, London Institute of Contemporary Christianity, and really their mission is to spread our faith into every part of our life, not just confined to a Sunday morning or whatever way we serve the church, but actually every part of our life is a way where God can use us to be the church and to be lights in the communities we find ourselves in. It's based on a book by Mark Green called Fruitfulness on the Frontline, but it's actually a video series as well. And so far, we have been looking at some M's. There's going to be 6 M's, ways on our front line we can bear fruit. The first one was modeling godly character. How can we be Jesus if you're a follower of Jesus? Because I recognize that maybe not all of you are followers of Jesus here this morning, but I want to give you an idea of what's required of us as a follower of Jesus. We're called to be Jesus on our front line. David came and spoke to us about making good work. Actually, the work that we do is important to God, and it's important that we do it well. And then last week, I looked at ministering grace and love. Doing the minimum is not what's required of us. We're told to go and do more, to minister in grace and love and go the extra mile for people. And the end we're looking at this morning is moulding culture. Moulding culture. Let me just get my sermon notes up. Now, I touched on this a little bit last week, but I can't understand people who say, I completely forgot to eat. Completely forgot about lunch. I mean, how does that even work? For me, lunch is at 1 o'clock, dinner is at 6. My life revolves around these points of time in my day where I eat. And I can't understand anyone that forgets about that. Daz, he's not in here, but he does that sometimes. He has to be reminded to have lunch. Like, what is going on? And really, I guess a lot of it's because that was how I was brought up. Now, the times were a bit different. We had lunch at 12 and dinner at 5:30, but it was the same every single day. And every single day we sat down around the table and we had food together. It's not right or wrong. It was just the way we did things in our family. And also, my mum was a food tech teacher or home economics teacher. And she always cooked things, home cooked food and all this sort of stuff. That was really important to us. And she always did things a little bit different. One of my personal favorites was corned beef and pickle curry. That was always a nice one. And it was nice. And sweet and sour chicken nuggets. That was also a favorite of mine. I don't know where she got these recipes from, but we always had home-cooked food. So we sat around together. We ate food together. Sometimes as we got older, we used to watch Neighbours together while having our dinner. It wasn't good or bad, right or wrong. It's just the way we did things. And also, I hadn't realized until I went to friends' houses that they didn't have portions quite as large as we had in our house. And I'd get there and they'd offer me dinner like, is that it? Is that all I'm getting? Because we always have big portions. Jen always complains when she goes to my parents that we have too much food. This is going to help my weight at all. But I like it personally. It wasn't right or wrong. It's just the way we did things in our family. And in all of your families or whatever you do things in a certain way. It's not right or wrong. It's just the way you do things. And I guess what you could call that is as a definition of the word culture. The culture is the way we do things round here. And whatever your front line is, whether it's the tennis club or the workplace or your home, you have a culture, the way things are done round here. And that can be something that's said. So you might go to a work for the first time and they take you through a process of teaching you about, this is what this place is like. This is how we do things around here. This is our culture. Some of it's said. Some of it is unsaid. And sometimes you may even have a culture that you haven't planned for and you don't even want. Sometimes for us, it's... Have you seen that advert? It's for Febreze where it says you've turned nose blind. You don't notice the stink in your house anymore until someone comes in and goes, "Oh, it's a bit stinky in here." Is it really? I hadn't noticed. You get nose blind. Sometimes we can become culture blind, and we are unaware of the culture that we are in. We are unaware of those good or bad things. It takes someone coming in who maybe hasn't been here before to say, "Well, have you noticed this?" Or why do you do it like this? And we're like, well, I don't know. We've always done it like that. I would love it. If you are new here, maybe you've been once, twice, however many times, come and tell me what you think the culture is in this church. Because sometimes we don't notice. We want to be a vibrant community where everyone is welcome, lives are changing, and Jesus is king. That's what we want to be. But if we're not doing that, we need to know so we can change. See, culture can be good. Hopefully when you come here, this is a good culture. It's welcoming, it's friendly, it's supportive. But what we've seen recently in our news is a bad culture, toxic culture. This week it was about Westminster, if you watch the news. A few weeks ago with the whole Philip Schofield thing, it was a Good Morning Television and a toxic culture that they had there. It wasn't just Philip Schofield, it was the whole environment. And unfortunately in our news we're finding with leaders and churches as well where the culture is toxic. See, I want to just look at, just briefly this morning, for the next 10, 15 minutes, is it possible for us to change the culture on our front lines for the good? I'd rather you didn't make it worse, but can you change it for good? Is there things that you can do in your family, in your workplaces, in the clubs you belong to, that's going to improve the culture? I'm going to be asking the question, how do you know what that looks like? What does a good culture look like? Now, at the beginning of the service, we read some verses together. Can I put those up on the screen again? I said I would talk about these. And these are verses I used last week as well when we talked about ministering in love and grace. It's from Matthew chapter 22. So we've got Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John there. The four Gospels, the four stories of Jesus. Gospel means good news. It talks about his life and ministry and has a lot of what Jesus said to people. And this is what Jesus said. Remember, some teachers of the law had quizzed Jesus and wanted to know what's the most important law in the Bible. Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. These two commandments sum up the culture of God's kingdom. If you want to be in a kingdom where God is king, we said Jesus is king in this is what we want to be here. This is the culture we want. We want to be a place, a culture that is like God's kingdom where we worship God, we honor him, we seek him, we love him, but also we have love for others as well, regardless of who they are. In this place, because that is what God's kingdom is like. And I would say, if you want to know what a good culture looks like, as opposed to a toxic culture, we want it to be a place where God is honored and people flourish. So we can use that as our benchmark, our plumb line, our test, our comparison to what is a good culture. Well, let's look at what God's kingdom culture is. So, a family ruled by a bullying parent failed the test. An organization run for the benefit of the boss failed. Not a good culture, not God's culture. A nation only interested in its own prosperity fail. That's not God's kingdom. That's not God's culture. And sometimes we don't even notice the toxic culture that we are in. Other times we step in and notice it straight away. See, we're told in the Old Testament, the story of the Jewish nation, they get to a point where they have messed up so much, where they have rejected God and his kingdom and his culture so much that they get defeated by the Babylonian Empire, this massive empire at the time. And for numerous reasons that I won't go into, the Babylonians sacked Jerusalem, the city, the capital city, the place where the Israelites lived, and they take them into exile. And they take them to the city of Babylon. And for them, this was a culture which was completely different to anything they'd known. They were in an alien culture. And they were hoping that they would only be there for a short amount of time. They could quickly get back to what they knew, and they wouldn't have to worry about this horrible culture, different culture, where they had different gods and different ways of doing things. They wouldn't have to worry about this anymore. But Jeremiah, you can read this in Jeremiah 29, shares some words from God, where God says, actually, you're going to be here for a long time. So what I want you to do is to settle down, to have family, to run businesses, to be part of this culture, part of this community. But I don't want you to just go with the flow, because there's lots of stuff they're doing which is toxic. I want you to be a positive influence on the culture that you are, the culture that you are in. And it talks about in verse 20, in chapter 29, it says, seek the peace and prosperity of the city. Seek the peace and prosperity. And peace and prosperity is one word in the original Hebrew, which is shalom. The peace and prosperity, shalom, kingdom values, what it means to be part of God's kingdom. I want you to bring those values and that culture and seek that for this alien, toxic culture that you find yourself in. I want you to bring love. Love for God and love for your neighbor into the culture you find yourself in. They were called to change, to mold the culture they found themselves in. And I will say that you are called to do the same if you're a follower of Jesus. But actually, even if you're not a follower of Jesus, if you're sitting there, well, not sure I even believe in God, let alone God's kingdom, I think we can all recognize that actually it's a good thing to make your frontline better. And that's a question for you, maybe a sobering question. Do you, on your frontline, make your culture better or worse? Do you make your culture better or worse? Do you make your family better or worse? Do you make the clubs you belong to better or worse? Do you make your workplace better or worse? How are you making these places a better place to be, where people can flourish? See, Jesus preached a sermon called the Sermon on the Mount. He didn't call it that. That's what we call it, because it was on the Mount. And basically, he was a manifesto about, if you're going to follow him, follow me, this is what it's going to be like. This is what God's kingdom is like. This is the values that I want you to emulate if you're a follower of me. And it says this in Matthew chapter 5, verse 13 to 16. Jesus is talking to his followers, people that want to follow him, want to be like him. This is what he says. Says, you are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. But he goes on and says, you also are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. So this is Jesus saying, you need to change, mold the culture you find yourself in. So let's look at those two things. He talks about salt and he talks about light. What is salt like? Well, I'm going back to food again. I'm going to talk about food a fair bit in this sermon. I grew up having salt. Who grew up having salt? We're not allowed to have salt anymore. Who used to dip their celery in salt? Yeah, used to get a pile of salt. It's the only way you can eat celery, because it's disgusting. It's horrible stuff. Pointless. But anyway, you dip it in salt, you eat it. It affects the flavor. It brings flavor to stuff. And a little salt can go a long way. I'm always fascinated by people who just get the salt shake and go. Anyone like that? That's not good for you. It's okay on chips, but nothing else. A little salt can go a long way. It affects the flavor. Also, particularly in ancient times when Jesus was talking, salt wasn't just something you put on your chips. It was something that was there to preserve meats, to stop them rotting, because they didn't have refrigeration at that time. So salt was used as a preservative to prevent rot. So if we kind of take that idea and apply it to us in our culture, when Jesus is saying, actually, if you do a little, then that can go a long way. You don't have to do big, grand gestures to change your culture. You can do just little things, and that can massively affect what happens to your culture. And we're going to be looking at some little things you can do in a moment. But also, you're there to make things better, to prevent rot, prevent things from getting worse. You can turn things around. So Jesus talks about salt, but he also talks about lights. 2,000 years ago, there was not quite as much light as there is these days. I mean, if you look at our world from space, you can just see all the lights everywhere. We can't see our stars so much because there is light everywhere. For them, light was hugely important, because unless the moon was out, you could not see in the dark. See, light reveals, it lights up. It can reveal a toxic culture. You can come into a culture and you can be light and you can reveal those things that are wrong and not healthy in the front line that you are in. But also it can guide us and direct us. You know, a city on a hill has a light, so you can see it if you happen to be traveling to it in the darkness. You can see it and you can be guided towards it. It can be a lamp to our path, as it says in the Psalms. We can see where we are going. But also it's attractive. You can attract flies like a light. But you can draw people to yourself. You can be attractive. People are drawn to light rather than darkness. That is what Jesus asked. If you're a follower of Jesus, you are called to be salt and light. You are there to change and mold the culture you are doing. So as I come to a close, how can we do that? What are the small things that maybe you can do on your front line that will mold and shape the culture? Well, Mark, in his book, Fruitfulness on the Front Line, shares the story of Diane. Now, Diane's team at work was fine, but she had been wondering how she could bring them together a bit more, develop a sense of camaraderie, just oil the wheels. So one day she invited her team into her office for a short break with coffee, and perhaps inspired by Marie Antoinette, for cake. A cake which, as it happened, she'd baked herself. I wish Diane worked here, but I wouldn't do my waistline any good. It was just a cake, but her team were bowled over that she could make such a lovely personal gesture for them. And the team loved the opportunity to relax together. Pretty soon, other people in the team volunteered to bake something, and it became a weekly feature. Later, they branched out into sharing nostalgia sweets, flying saucers with the transparent tops that you stick your fingers through, sherbet fountains with those licorice tubes that you are theoretically meant to suck the sherbet through, but which inevitably clog up. So you get to do what you really want to do all along, just glug it back. Now, what was happening here was not just that the calorie count was rising. What was happening was that memories were being shared, relationships deepened, and levels of understanding and trust were rising like the sponge in a jam roly-poly. Of course, our employers don't pay us to eat cake and chat about Rooney or recipes or long-lost relatives. However, recent business research does reveal that organizations where there are regular informal opportunities for people just to talk to one another are more productive and therefore more profitable. Good relationships are good for business. So what has Diane done here? What seemed like just a bit of cake is actually created a better relationship. It's enabled people to flourish, and actually it's going to have a positive effect on the business. Well, what Diane here is to identify, firstly, an aspect of the culture that could be improved. There wasn't anything hugely wrong with the team, but she looked at, actually, I could make it a little bit better. Secondly, she looked for a kingdom solution, a God's kingdom solution. And thirdly, she tried it out, putting in time, investing money, and making herself a little bit vulnerable. The cake might not have turned out to be so good, and people might not have got on. But she risked it, and they did. When I moved to Hawley as a family, before we lived on a busy road, okay, lots of cars, and you didn't really know our neighbours. And we thought, well, we're moving into this little cul-de-sac, really. We could have a culture where everyone knows each other. We could have barbecues on our front lawn, and we can invite people around. It's going to be great. We got there, and we got as far as sending a Christmas card round to the house, and we never got any further than that. Because it's hard work. And it's risky. And it makes yourself vulnerable. And what if no one turns up? Are you willing to take the risk, to put in the effort, to make even just a small change, to mold the culture that you find yourself in? Mark just brings out just a couple of other things. Little small things that you can do that might make big changes, like that salt. How about thinking about the way we affirm and honor others around us? Do you affirm those people around you? Do you let them know when they've done something well, even if they're the dreaded person in HR who you absolutely just ruins your day all the time, but actually they did do something good? You want to affirm them in that. What about the letter we write in appreciation of a faithful friend? And in a digital world, the physical speaks powerfully. The Christmas card we send that includes something we've appreciated about a shopkeeper, a colleague, a plumber. Choosing to apologize in a culture where no one takes responsibility. So the decision to ensure no one has anything against you. The offer to spearhead the club's recycling initiative. The quote for the day that you stick on the end of your email. Tiny little things that you can do that are salts that go a long way. Ways in which you can let your light shine. You can bring positivity and bring positive change to your culture rather than making things worse. We're going to have some questions that are going to come up on the screen. And I encourage you just to take these away and think about them. Our sound isn't working, so I'm going to have to read them as they come up. But use the time to reflect. We're going to sing a song, more time to reflect. And then I want you to respond. There's going to be an opportunity for you to respond in a physical way by standing up. If you want to make a positive difference on your front line, if you want to help mold the culture by doing something small, I'm going to ask you to respond to that by standing up and saying to God, help me do this and show me what it is that I can do. So we're going to come to that in a minute. But let's watch the video together. What do you particularly like or dislike about the culture of your front line? Where are kingdom values displayed on your front line? Where are they lacking? What initiative, however small, might you take to make it better? Ask God to show you.